Hello world and welcome to my channel. In this lesson, you'll learn how to add CSS to an HTML document. Let's get started. At the end of the lesson, you'll learn how to add an external style sheet to an HTML document. You'll also learn how to add an internal style sheet and how to add an inline style sheet to any HTML document. So how do we add CSS to our HTML document, or how do we style our web page? Now, the first thing to do is to tell the HTML document that we have some CSS rules we want to apply to the elements on the document. Now, there are three different ways to apply CSS to an HTML document. So what are the three ways? We can use an external style sheet, we can use an internal style sheet, and we can do what is called inline styles. Now we'll look at each of these methods of adding CSS to our HTML document. So don't get confused and watch to the end of the video. Let's look at what an external style sheet is. So what is an external style sheet? An external style sheet is usually a separate file, and this file is saved with a .css extension. Now this file will contain all the CSS rules that you want to use to style your web page. When you have an external file, you can use that same file to style one page or multiple web pages in your website. So what is the benefit of using an external style sheet to style our web page? Well, it separates the styling from your HTML code. So when the styling is separated from your HTML code, it makes it easier for you to manage and reuse that same style sheet across different pages. So typically when you are building a website, you would have a home page, you would have an about page, you would have contact us page, and multiple pages. Now, to style all of these pages, you could now create an external style sheet. And in that external style sheet, you will now define all the rules that needs to be applied to any HTML element that you will select in any of your web pages. This means that when you go to your home page, you can select an element in your external style sheet and then declare all the properties and values that needs to be applied to that particular element in your home page. You can still select an element in, let's say, your about page, and in your external style sheet, you will now declare the properties and the values that needs to be applied to that selected element in your about page. So using one style sheet, we can style multiple pages on our website. Alright, so how do we add an external style sheet to our HTML document? So the first step is to create a file. Now, if you want your CSS file to be in the same folder as your HTML document, you would have to create your file in the same folder as your HTML document. And you save the file as styles.css. Meaning the file name will be styles and the extension would be .css. This is similar to how we created our HTML file and then named it index.html or about.html. Now the next step is to link this file, the style.css, to your HTML page, which is your index.html. And you are going to place it within the head section of your HTML document. So in the head section of your HTML document, you're going to add this line, link rel up to this end. This is the line you're going to add inside the head section of your HTML document. Now, what does this line mean? What it says that we want to link our CSS file to our HTML page. So this rel attribute help us to get a relationship between the CSS file and your current HTML document. Then you have a type attribute that says that the type of file we are using is a CSS file. Now the href would point to the location of your CSS file. So because the CSS file is in the same location as my HTML document, I'm going to point to the same directory, that's styles.css. When you've linked your CSS file to your HTML document, your styles.css file will now contain all the CSS rules that needs to be applied across your entire page. So the CSS rule that needs to be applied in your home, your about, or any other page that you will create would all be in your styles.css. Alright folks, so this is our index.html file or our HTML document, and you'll notice that we have some HTML elements inside the body element. Now we want to add CSS to this HTML document. How do we go about it? The first step is to create your style sheet, or the file that will contain all your CSS rules. So we go to File, New File, and we will save our file. So you're going to save this file in the same project directory that we have. So I'm going to save this file as styles.css. Then I'll click on the save. So as you can see, my file has been saved and it has the name styles.css. The next thing we need to do is to link this file to our index.html. So we'll go to our index.html document, and we learned that we are going to link this file within the head element. So we have our opening head tag and the closing head tag. Inside this head tag, we can add our link. So let's go to the end of the title tag and then write our link tag. So we're going to write this link tag over here. Right. Now this link tag will have two main attributes, the rel attribute and the href attribute. The rel attribute is going to now specify the relationship between our CSS file and our HTML document. So the CSS file, the HTML document, knows that it needs to rely on the CSS file for styling. So in the rel attribute, we are going to have a value and name that value style sheet. So that tells us that we are linking a style sheet to our HTML document. The next attribute we'll need is our href. Now this href will point to where we have our CSS file. So we're going to have our href attribute, and the value for that attribute would be the location of our CSS file. Now because the CSS file is in the same directory as our index.html, we are only going to specify the file name. So we're going to write styles.css, and then we'll save our file. So here we've linked our CSS file called styles.css to our HTML document. Now that we've added our CSS file to our HTML document, let's go ahead and style an element on our home page. So in the home page, I have an H1 element that says home page. I want to style this H1 element by changing its color to blue when you visit the web page. So first, let's take a look at how this H1 element is displayed on the web page. So this is our HTML document that has been loaded in our browser, and then we have our home page. Now on the home page, we have an H1 element that displays the home page. Currently, the color is black. What we want to do is to style this H1 element content and change the color to blue. So how do we proceed? Because we've added our style sheet externally to our HTML document, we can go to our styles.css and then define all the CSS rules that we want to apply not only to the index.html but to any other HTML file that we would create in our project directory. So first, let's go to our styles.css. It is currently empty. My task is to change the home page text to a color blue. Now we go to our CSS syntax. What is the rule for adding CSS to our HTML document? We will need a selector and declaration. The selector selects the HTML element you would want to style. So now I want to style my heading 1, which is my H1 element. So I'm going to write H1. After your selector, you need your declaration block. So I bring my left curly brace and the right curly brace. Inside my declaration block, I will now make my declarations. So the first declaration I want to change is the CSS property of color, and the value I want to give to it is blue. So I write my property name color, bring my colon, and then specify the value I want to give to my heading 1. I want the text to be blue in color. And then I end with a semicolon. So let's save this file and reload our browser to see the effect. So this is my web page that is still showing my home page with a text color of black. Now when I reload this page, the color instantly changes to blue. This means I have successfully added my CSS file to my HTML document. Now the next way we can add CSS to our HTML document is using an internal style sheet. So what is an internal style sheet? An internal style sheet is a method to apply CSS styles to a single HTML page. So how do we add an internal style sheet to an HTML page? First, you define the internal styles in the head section of your HTML document, and these styles will be defined inside the style element. So you're going to have an opening style tag and a closing style tag. Inside the opening and closing style tag, you define your CSS rules that you'd want to apply to that HTML page. So what is the advantage of using an internal styles to style your HTML page? The internal styles allow you to style specific elements on your HTML page without having to create a separate CSS file. So it is a quick way to style elements in your HTML page without necessarily creating a separate CSS file. Next, let's look at how to add an internal style sheet to our HTML document. We'll go to our code editor and then apply an internal style to an element on our HTML document. So this is our web page, our about page, and then we have this paragraph being displayed. We have been creating better opportunity for skills workers since 2005. Currently, it is not styled. The task is to style this content by changing the background color to yellow, and we want to apply an internal style to our HTML page. So let's go back to our HTML document and then see the process. Now the internal style would also be applied inside your head element. So within my opening and closing head element, I will now define a style element that would have an opening style tag and a closing style tag. Inside my opening and closing style tag, I will now apply my CSS rule. So what is the rule? Select the element you want to style, and in the declaration block, define the property and then the corresponding value that you want to apply to the selected element. So first, the element I want to style is the paragraph element. So I select it by writing the P. Then I write my declaration block. Inside my declaration block, I'll define the CSS property that I would want to style. So I want to style the background. So I'm going to look for this background color property. You see, we have a lot of CSS properties that can be applied to the paragraph. I only want the background color. So I select the background color. Then I'll now apply the value. What do I want to change the background color to? I want to change it to yellow. So the value I put here would be yellow. And then I save my file. So when I go back to my about page and reload, the paragraph content should be in a yellow background. Alright, so this is my about page. If I reload this browser, we notice that we will have styled the paragraph to have a yellow background. So that is how to apply an internal style to a single HTML document. Now, the last way to apply CSS to your HTML document is using an inline style sheet. So what is an inline style sheet? Inline styles are styles that are applied to a specific element within the body section of your web page. When you use an inline style to style your web page, the style will be applied to that element only. It will not be applied to your entire page or to other link pages. The style would only be applied to the element. So if I use an inline style on a heading element, it is only the heading element that the CSS rule will be applied to. The rule will not be applied to other elements on the pages or any external page like a home page, about, or any other page that I would have. Let's see how to add an inline style to an HTML document. So inline styles apply CSS directly to individual HTML elements, and it uses the style attribute. So here's how to use them. We have our HTML element here, and then we'll specify the style attribute in the opening tag of our HTML element. Now we'll have our equal to sign, and in the quote we'll indicate the CSS property that you would want to style, bring a colon, then specify the corresponding value. That will give us our first declaration. If you want another CSS declaration, we'll need to bring our semicolon, start the next property, colon, and the corresponding value, then end the declaration. So this will apply the style that has been specified here only to that particular HTML element. Let's go to our code editor and see the effect. So this is our code. We are currently in our about.html document, and the HTML document has two paragraph elements. This is the first paragraph and the second paragraph. Now we want to apply an inline style, which means we want to style an individual HTML element. So I want to style this second paragraph, not the first, so that I can apply inline style to this one. So what is the syntax? I need to specify my style attribute. Then inside my quotation, I'll specify the property I want to change and the corresponding value. So the CSS property I want to change is the background color. So now I'm going to write my background color. And I want to change the background color to yellow. So that's going to be my value. So I'm going to write yellow here. Then I save my file. So when I go to my about page, I would expect we are a team of designers, developers, and thinkers to have a yellow background. However, this other paragraph will not be styled because I applied an inline style which directly style an individual HTML element. Let's take a look. All right, so I've reloaded my web page, and as you can see, we are a team of designers, developers, and thinkers having a yellow background. The first paragraph has not changed the background color because of the inline style rule that was applied. So what have we learned in this lesson? In this lesson, we've learned 3 ways to style our HTML document to our web page. We can use an external style sheet, an internal style sheet, and inline style. When you use an inline style, you're going to style an individual element in your HTML document, and in that element to specify the style attribute and declare the property and the corresponding value that needs to be applied to the HTML element. If you go for an inline internal style sheet, you are going to style a single HTML page or a single web page. With that, you would have to specify the style element within the head element of your HTML document. Then inside your opening style tag and the closing style tag, you will now define the CSS rules. You can also go for an external style sheet. In this approach, you'll create a separate CSS file and link that CSS file to your HTML document. That is the index.html document. When you've linked your CSS file to your HTML document, you can go to your file, which is the style.css, and then specify the CSS rules that need to be applied not only to your index.html page, but to other web pages that you would have later. Thank you very much for joining me in this lesson. If you found value in this lesson, please leave a like, subscribe, or leave your comment or feedback. I would love to hear from you and reply to your comment. See you next time, and keep coding.